Hello, this is Jan from Red Toad Art Studio, and today we're going to do a simple project. We're going to learn how to add shadows and highlights to a leaf in watercolor. This is a basic, and you know, almost every watercolorist developed their own way of doing things, and if you're a beginner, you will eventually develop your favorite way of doing things. But I'm going to show you one way to work with shadows and highlights, and an easy thing to do that with is a leaf. So today you'll need some watercolor paper or mixed media paper, a pencil, an eraser, a permanent marker, a watercolor brush, any that you have will do. I'm going to have a ruler to put a frame on my picture. And then, of course, watercolors. You can use any watercolors you have. I have a lot of sets of watercolors, but I like to do these with Crayola because that's what a lot of you have, and it's easy for you to get it without having to make orders and going to a craft store. Just go to a store like Walmart, you can get Crayolas. I like to have one of these little dripper bottles like this. You can salvage this from some medicine sometimes, or just get one at the store. And a container of water. Tape to tape your picture down. Something to tape your picture to, and I just use one of these clipboards. Piece of paper to check out the colors of your paint, and a paper towel. I think that about covers what you need, and this will be a simple picture today. The idea is to learn how to do some highlighting and some shadowing on a simple subject. We have done this in some of our paintings already, but we're just going to focus on a leaf today. We aren't going to put a flower with it or anything else, maybe a dab of yellow background, I don't know, we'll see. So, let's just start. First thing we need to do is draw our leaf. So I'm going to quickly make my frame around the edges. Alright, I am going to do hibiscus leaves because we've been doing hibiscus flowers in some of our earlier videos where we were painting flowers. And those are pretty leaves. And they kind of just like droop down and over. So we're going to draw a light outline of a couple leaves coming down. One a little bit under the other, just like that. And maybe we'll put just a little bit of a leaf that's there, which would eventually go down into the hibiscus plant. Now that is just to set aside space and show us kind of where we want it to be. So the next thing we're going to do, hibiscus have not sharply sawtooth jagged edges, but softly jagged edges. So we're going to just do this. Don't be too picky. Now you could be. You can make as many little jaggeds on one side as on the other. But you know, when we get that picky with our art, it ceases to be fun. Now you might be an artist, though, that loves to do super realistic, and then you have to start counting maybe. I've got 4 on this side and 5 on that side. Oops, I gotta fix it. I don't like to paint that way. It takes a lot of the fun away from me. Now we need to put the center vein in. So don't do that just as a rigidly straight line. Make it a little bit curvy. Now drawing these leaves is super easy. So you can do this time and time again and have a lot of chance to practice painting. And now we want to put side veins in, which do kind of follow these edges of your leaf. How about that? See how lucky we were to come up with them matching. You know what? I didn't do too bad for not counting, did I? That's surprising. See if we did as well on this one. Not bad. All right. Now, real quickly, we're going to ink it. Inking your projects is totally up to you. A lot of watercolor art is not inked, and a lot of it is. It's all what you like. There, we're all inked. We've inked our frame and our leaves. So now let's erase our pencil lines. There, now we have our picture all drawn, inked, and erased, ready to paint. So let's get our paint ready next. Here is a Crayola watercolor set. Now, as I say, you can use any set you wish. What you will need is kind of a medium green, a darker green, and a yellow. And actually, I like to darken the green up a little bit that's in this watercolor set with a brown. So let's activate our brown. I have already activated these, and now I will activate the brown. As you can tell, I have used this for several pictures lately, and sometimes I like the color that was mixed, and you know, I don't have to throw that color away. Just let it dry and reactivate it. Add a little bit of water, and it's good to go again. So you never really have to waste watercolors, which is great. So, as I said, I like to mix my basic green. This has been done here. And I'm going to reactivate this and make a little more since we have big leaves there. We'll do a little more mixing. So, if you're starting from scratch, which you will be, just put some water in here. Come over and grab this medium grassy green, which is this one right here. You'll need to test all of your watercolors out so you know which is which. Now let's mix some green here. And then I like to tone it down just a bit with some brown. So I'm going to grab just, not much, just a dab of brown over here. And add that into our mixture. And then we'll test it out on our piece of paper. Let's see what we have here. You know, I am going to add just a dab more brown to that. A lot of times, our colors straight from the pens are a little too bright in your face colors, and you need to tone them down a little bit to be more natural. And that's one thing that can make your Crayola watercolors look really neat in pictures. I think that's much better. It's not a lot different, but it's not bright green. In fact, I could show you what this is without being toned down. Do you see the difference? Oh, I guess I should get over here. Let me show you the difference between the green before. See how bright that is? And it's a pretty green. And this is my toned down green, which I added a little brown to. And this is more natural than this bright green is. Now you might like this bright green, and go ahead and use that if you like. I think, yes, that's the only color that we need to mix. All right, before we paint, let's tape our picture down to our clipboard. There we are, all taped and ready to go. Now we're going to use a method today called wet on dry. Our paper is dry at this point, but we're going to put very wet paint onto the dry paper. Now, let's see. I don't have room to have my paints and my picture here, so I am going to set my paints right off here. You won't be able to see me dip into the paint, but I want you to be able to see this painting very clearly. So you'll know what I'm doing. I'm going to be dipping into my green paint that I mixed and covering this with very wet paint. So let's start. Here we go. Nice, wet, watery paint. Now, if you want, you could do this strip here, which will be yellow first. I usually do it first, but it can be done second too, or third, whatever spot you want to do this in. All right, while this is still wet, dip into your dark green pan. Just get a little bit of that dark green on your brush and dab it into the wet areas, like on the tips of the leaves here. Now this looks funny at first. I'm going to dab again into my wet paint. And then we're going to kind of follow down through the veins. Now you don't have to be real picky here. Now, before this dries, I want to be sure this dark is out to the edges of my leaf. You see that? And when you want paint to dry, it takes forever. But when you're working with wet paint and you need to work with it wet, then it dries so fast it's crazy. So, smoothing out these edges. Now, wipe your brush off and clean it in water quickly. And dip into your yellow. You can use either yellow. I think I'll use this one today. And just dot yellow into these center spots here. And it'll mix with the dark. That's okay. Don't worry about it. Just dip it though. You don't want to brush back and forth. You just want to dot that yellow in there and let it do its thing. Look how pretty that is. There's one side of our leaf done. And it's wet yet. It needs to spread on its own. Let it do its thing. Don't fiddle with it too much. So now dry that yellow off on a paper towel. Clean your brush. And now we're going to go dip into our mixed green and do this side. And do the same thing. We need to keep this nice and wet or our technique won't work nearly as well. In fact, we'll get all kinds of sharp edges and lines in it if it dries. So be sure it's nice and wet. Dip into your dark green and do the same thing. Spread paint around the edges. Try not to get it off the edge of your leaf. If you do, it's not the end of the world. We'll clean it up after it dries. Okay, come along this edge and be sure your paint is up to the edge of your leaf. Now, clean your brush, dip into your yellow, and dab yellow into these sections. Isn't that pretty? That makes such a beautiful leaf. All right. Let's clean our brush. Now, you can either start and go ahead and do this leaf, since you're going to be using greens. If this was, say, another colored leaf, like a brown leaf or a dead leaf, you would want to wait until this thoroughly dried so that you could paint up against this color. Since it's the same color, you can probably go ahead and do this wet. But if you have a few minutes, it'd be a good idea to let this just kind of dry. And I think that's what I'll do. I'm going to give it maybe 5 minutes here. Okay, now if I'd have been thinking when I started this picture, and you know it's a good thing to think before, I'd have painted this side first, then gone to this side. By the time I was done here, this would have been dried enough to go ahead and paint this leaf. Sometimes you need to think about the order. Now, it's just still damp, but I think I can go ahead and do this because it is the same color. I mentioned to you that you could, so let's go ahead and give it a whirl. If it looks like it's drying anywhere, just get it wet, add some wet water to it. Now, into our dark green paint. Oops. There will be extra shadow around this area because that leaf will cast a shadow on the second leaf. Now remember, come along and smooth these edges. Still working with wet paint. Now clean your brush. Dip into your yellow. And add your yellow here. See how pretty this one has gotten now that it's drying and the paint is spreading out? Watercolor is one of the hardest things to learn, and I am definitely in the process of learning. But it is also one of the most amazing ones because it will keep working after you quit. You won't see the finished project until it has dried, and you really never know what it's going to be till you're done. There we go. And we need to clean the brush and do this last side here. And while I'm here, I'm going to get this little spot painted too. That might have been better being a dark color. We might go back in there and add a little dark to that when we add dark here. All right. Check to be sure everything's nice and wet. Go in and get that dark paint. We'll do a dab over here while we're here. There we go. All right, let's smooth out our edges. Clean your brush. Get your yellow before this dries. There we go. Now, before we finish, we do need to let this dry because we need to color this down. Another color. I think we're going to use a yellow, maybe darkened with a little brown. So, while that's drying, we can mix that up. I'm going to try to mix a bit of that yellow right here in this corner. Hopefully we don't get too much green mixed in. We don't need much. There's some water. I'm going to grab the yellow. And we're going to add just a touch of brown to it. And touch. Very little. See how that darkened that? And I mean that was very little. So let's test it. I think we'll go with that. Alright, it's about 10 minutes later. And this is still damp. If you have time, I'd suggest you even wait a little longer. But I'm anxious to keep working on my video here and keep painting. And you'll do that too. We'll paint when we shouldn't. So, the yellow brown that I mixed, I want to paint along this area and this area. I hope this color works. Yes, it's going to work just fine. Now, if you noticed, I don't know if the camera shows it, there's spots where my green went over. As you're putting this wet paint down, let it soak into the green spots. Put wet paint down. And as it soaks, if you come back and lightly, I won't say scrub, but lightly brush over those areas, that green will dissolve into your new yellow and you won't even see that it was there. And don't worry too much if, like I did there, my yellow went over into the leaf. That's fine because the leaf has a lot of yellow in it already. Now you might want to do this center area in a different color. That's fine. You do whatever color you want in this center. It could be that dark green would work. Or a lighter yellow. Whatever you would like. So now let's go do this one. And I am glad that I can let this yellow soak in a little bit and get rid of my jiggles and joggles. We'll let it soak in a second or two. Doesn't take long for that to dissolve the underneath paint. Now, it wouldn't move it, most likely, except that we're going to come back and move it ourselves with our paintbrush. So remember, if you want the underneath color to not change and you want it to stay there, don't go back and forth over it after you put another layer on. But you can use that fact to get rid of mistakes, just like this. There we go. Blends it in together nicely. All right. Now, that's our leaves. I want to make this look a little more finished, so I'm going to put some yellow background in. And now, this video was just about painting our leaves, or our highlights and our shadows. If I wanted to make a totally finished picture of this, wouldn't a little bumblebee say up here? Or a butterfly? Finish it off and make a finished painting of this. So you might think about that. We haven't had a video on drawing bugs. We'll have to do that. We'll have to have a video on bees and butterflies. But right now, I am going to mix up some very, very dilute yellow. I mixed some up the other day, so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to rehydrate that. Mix it up. And that's probably not enough. If you're going to do a good share of the background, get you a good little puddle made. I want just a tad, very little bit of the light green in your set. It'll take that brightness off, but still give us a background. Now, we want this to be very diluted and very light. We don't want it to overpower our main subject. So let's see how dark this will be. See this right here? This is what we're aiming at, something that light. Now this, yep, that's about what we want right there. So let's just dab into this, and we're just going to add a very rough-edged yellow background. All right, we are done. Let's move our paint aside. Let's clean our brush. Never forget to do that. Never put your brush in and leave it in the water. Never, ever. You will ruin your tip. Dab it in there, get it right out, pull down, and put the point back when you're done. And it'll be ready to go the next time. All right, let's sign our painting. Now I would suggest you let it dry on here so it will dry flat. Okay, let's take the tape off of our picture and see how we've done here. Remember when taking tape off to always pull away from your picture. That helps you to not tear your paper. And the less time you leave this tape on here, the easier it will be to get off. I left some on for several days, and by the time I got around to taking that off, it was a little hard. In fact, it pulled some of my paper in a way I did not like. So don't leave it on too long. An hour or two, that's fine, even overnight. But don't leave it on for days or you'll regret it. Okay, there is our finished summer leaves. Isn't that neat? Now, why don't you try this and then try finishing it off with a bug or something in with it and just make a complete picture. All right, I hope you've enjoyed doing these simple, beautiful leaves, and we will be back with you for our next video, so I'm going to say bye for now.